This presentation is an introductory analysis of the Module B critical study of text, considering the poem When You Are Old by W.B. Yeats. This presentation looks to give some introductory analysis to When You Are Old and some tips and tricks around what to look out for when analysing the poem for HSC Module B. It's important again to note the significance of Module B, the critical study of texts. We're drawn again to the second sentence of the module rubric, which indicates that through critical analysis and evaluation of its language, content and construction, students will develop an appreciation of the textual integrity of their prescribed text. Additionally, it's important to note that in this particular module, students are required also to support their original views with supplementary literary critics, and that's an important distinction to remember with this particular module. That goes back to the first sentence of the module rubric, which indicates that students are required to engage with and develop an informed personal understanding of their prescribed text. This informed personal understanding of the prescribed text comes from much wider reading in relation to specific literary critics around the poet W.B. Yeats. The module rubric is presented in greater detail here, but it's important for students to remember that as they examine the features that contribute to textual integrity, they need to understand the particular components of each of these particular areas. And just going back to the previous slide, second sentence, language, content and construction. These are three elements emphasised that all work together as components to create an overall textual harmony. When you're old, here's a bit of an overview. I think this graphic's a very helpful one in looking at what lies at the heart of this poem. And of course, in looking at the tension, in looking at the sense of loss, and in looking at the helplessness of the persona, who we assume to be Yeats in this case, talking about his beloved Maud gone. And again, gone constantly broke Yeats's heart. And we go to that quote from the poem. One man loved the pilgrim soul in you, and loved the sorrows of your changing face. Yeats professes himself to be the true love of Maud, and it's in this unrequited love that Yeats experiences that universal feeling of being ultimately heartbroken. We need to go back to considering Yeats's purpose. When we look at the title, When You Are Old, the title uses the second person in the reference to you to refer to another person. So in Yeats's title, immediately he's giving us a sense that the poem refers to another person, not when I am old or when me, myself, and I are old. It's very much a second person reference to another. The poem was published in 1892 as part of a collection of poems from the Rose. The poem takes a melancholic, nostalgic tone, and again it's important to indicate in your extended responses when writing about this the overall tone of Yeats's poem, because that links directly to the choice of language made by Yeats and also links further to an understanding of the way in which poetic devices are used in conjunction with language choices to create an overall poetic structure to deliver this particular tone of melancholy and nostalgia. In further considering Yeats's purpose, When You're Old, this would be his most anthologized and best loved poem. It's based on the 16th century sonnet by French poet Pierre Ronsard, from which Yeats has taken the title and opening phrase. Again, it's important to situate the art, the poetry of Yeats within the broader European context of the time, to look at which different European influences Yeats took into his poetry. We know that the Raphaelites, we know that the French symbolist movement, and we know that modernism had particular influences on the development and evolution of Yeats's work over his career. And of course, the poems that are set for the suite of poems for the HSC in Module B consider poems at different points in Yeats's journey in his career. Yeats had promised marriage to Maud Gonne, that is, he had proposed, a number of times, and despite being rejected, Yeats persisted with the proposals. It tells us immediately that there is something unresolved in Yeats here. There is a love that he has convinced himself to be true for Maud, and that Maud's decision not to take Yeats up on his proposals of marriage doesn't leave him with immediate dashed hopes. He goes back for a second opportunity to propose, but it does remind us of the significance of where we find Yeats as the voice, the persona of the poem at this particular point, as he reflects strongly on this sense of final awareness of this unrequited, this unreturned love from Maud. Yeats, the persona, imagines that many years later Maud will remember him and his love for her as an old woman and reflect, a little sadly, how love fled. And this is a little bit of a double-edged sword here, because Yeats nearly wishes Maud this kind of discomfort, this melancholic feeling that he's currently enduring, when eventually one day an awareness develops in Maud in her old age, of course, when she is no longer as attractive as she is now. Her natural beauty, as is the case for all of us, will fade over time, and that there's a sense within Maud of regret. And there's nearly a hope here in Yeats that Maud feels the deep regret of having let the love, who is Yeats, flee and walk away from her life. The persona imagines that the beloved at some stage well into the future will be alone, and that as well as being old and no longer beautiful, will dream of the soft look your eyes once had. And again, that's that longing. Yeats hopes that Maud in her old age, who inevitably finds herself alone, will look back and remember and treasure with a sense that the soft look that the eyes of Yeats once had for her was something that she mourns for. In further considering Yeats's poem and purpose for When You Are Old, the poem is not only autobiographical or merely the expression of one man's sadness over unreciprocated passion. Neither the speaker nor the subject of his love is specifically named, and there's that ambiguity that there is in fact a near feeling of a universal experience being one that is generalizable to all of us at some stage in our life, that in fact we will have feelings for someone who may not be able to return those feelings for a range of reasons. And what Yeats tends to do here is, while not talking directly of himself or naming Maud gone, there is a hope here that he touches into the experience of his reader, his audience, and in bringing them in with their own life experiences and own understandings of what the kick in the guts, if you like, of unrequited love feels like, he opens us up here, as the next point indicates, to objectivity. And he objectively universalizes the intense emotions experienced by the persona. And again, those intense experiences of longing, of hope, and of love, which are unreturned, is something that, generally speaking, it's a universal experience, happens to all of us at some point throughout life, hopefully not too regularly. The poem's emotion is strengthened beyond sentimental self-pity by the dramatic setting which Yeats has given to the poem. And let's start to have a look at that now. In opening up, Yeats looks in stanza 1 at the whole idea of nodding by the fire, taking down this book, as a reflection that the poem is full of movement and action, and indeed it is. The poem is not simply a passive meditation on disappointed love. It dramatizes the emotions of individuals. And in looking at each of the stanzas one at a time now, we will consider that. When You Are Old, stanza 1. When you are old and grey and full of sleep, and nodding by the fire, take down this book, and slowly read and dream of the soft look your eyes once had, and of their shadows deep. Looking at the rhyming structure here in this particular verse and the stanza, we see that there is a distinct rhyming structure. As you can see, the last word in line 1, sleep, matches in rhyme to the last word of line 4, deep. If we look at line 2 and line 3, the last words in each of those lines, book and look, rhyme with each other. This is what's known as an A-B-B-A rhyming structure. As it says in the first point, sleep, book, look, and deep use long vowel sounds. The use of the A-B-B-A rhyme scheme is a significant understanding for us as we look at poetic form. This poem has 3 perfect quatrains. And a reminder, a quatrain is a 4-line stanza. The use of the rhyming scheme A-B-B-A, with the last word of the first and fourth lines rhyming with each other, and the second and third lines rhyming with each other, gives us a very strong and strict poetic structure. The verses and stanzas, rather, of Yeats's poems are very tightly contained in the 4-line quatrain. These ideas are contained very strongly, and through Yeats choosing a poetic form that has a strong structure to it, we're able to understand that we are looking at a very deliberate attempt to control ideas. Looking at the rhyming structure overall here, as we see throughout the poem, it follows this A, B, B, A rhyming structure. We've got stanzas 1, stanzas 2, and stanza 3 here to show that these perfect quatrains indicate that each stanza of 4 lines in length has very tightly controlled ideas, which Yeats seeks to contain with a deliberate and planned rhyming structure. When You're Old, stanza 2. How many loved your moments of glad grace, and loved your beauty with love false or true, but one man loved the pilgrim soul in you, and loved the sorrows of your changing face. Again, we can see the way in which the A, B, B, A rhyming structure has been applied to this stanza. As we look at stanza 2, we look at the question here of how many loved your moments of glad grace, and loved your beauty with love false or true, but one man loved the pilgrim soul in you, and loved the sorrows of your changing face. We look at the pilgrim soul here as a metaphor. It implies there was something quite unique about the beloved, something that was deep inside. And that whole idea of the pilgrim soul, the pilgrim is a traveller, and through religious imagery we get an understanding that the pilgrim is someone who is on a spiritual journey, gaining new insights as they walk along the journey. And as we see here, is that analysis of the pilgrim below. Stanza 3. As we look at stanza 3, there is an idea that comes through about bending down beside the glowing bars. As you see here, the image of the fireplace that is there, the glowing bars are the ground area, the tray in a fireplace which holds the burning logs. It's the metal tray that is inserted inside the fireplace. And again, those glowing bars heat up as the wood burns and give a gentle glow and gentle red and orange light. All the beloved has is the fire's glowing bars and the book containing this poem. It's deliberately set as a scene of isolation here, as the person sits contemplating life, invited in the reflection of the fire. And of course, the fire that is burning here is symbolic of the fire of love. However, much the same as love at times in different relationships, the fire only lasts for a certain amount of time. You take away the wood, or if the wood burns through, the fire extinguishes. The fire has a shelf life, as do these feelings of love. Love fled and hid his face amid a crowd of stars. The true lover is lost in the galaxy of other lovers. The suggestion is that the beloved, Maud gone, will murmur a little sadly. And again, love fled, being Yeats, and hid his face amid a crowd of stars, blended into the background, left life and moved on. This is the hope here that with a murmur and a little sadly, Maud, in her reflection in later life, will realise that she made a mistake in letting Yeats go. The poetic tone, it's one of stoic acceptance and loss. Or do we believe that Yeats, at this point, after being rejected twice by Maud in terms of his proposal of marriage, will finally have the message sink in? That's a question for us. Finally, we need to look at a couple of key things. The tempo of the poem is significant because it is slow and dreamlike. It's deliberately reflective in the approach that Yeats has forged. The beloved is forced to look into the future and see the consequences of what is happening in the present. Here's our takeaway. The strength of the poem lies in the way in which true love becomes lost among a multiplicity of false and superficial loves that come and go from life. And knowing the context of Maud Gone, we know that she was married to Sean McBride. And of course, as we know from the poem Easter 1916, Yeats refers to Sean McBride as a drunken, vainglorious lout. Interestingly enough, Maud Gonne and Sean McBride separated in 1905. The marriage broke down, and Yeats had great resentment over the treatment received by Maud from her former husband, Sean McBride. And it's interesting here that Yeats, knowing that later Maud would go on to marry McBride, reflects him here in this poem about love being lost. His love eventually being lost, not because he turned off his emotions for Maud, but because the opportunity to love one another was lost by this multiplicity of false or superficial loves. And of course, Maud had many admirers, namely Sean McBride. That brings us to the end of this introductory analysis of the poem When You Are Old.